Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is your host, Mike Dowdy, and I'm here with, let me rephrase. I am grateful for my co-host, Jen David Lang, who is here with me on a random Saturday morning right before Thanksgiving. So, hi, Jen. How are you?
I'm good. I'm grateful to be here with you and grateful to be doing this podcast with you, Mike. You've got such a radio voice. You keep everyone awake.
It's a face for radio. So, we're gonna get to this in a second. So we have a very special guest with us here, Jason Strzalkowski, who is an instructional technology coach for the Van Buren Public Schools near Detroit. Jason's joining us because we're gonna talk about AI today. Super exciting! Woo! Welcome, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be a fun conversation.
So the first thing we have to get settled out of the box is when we were going back and forth on email about setting up dates and all this other stuff, Jason saw my name in print, saw Mike Dowdy, and thought maybe I was the former lead singer of Soul Coughing. Sorry about your luck. I am not. No relation. But
I was really hoping.
but I do play some mediocre cello, so I got that going for me. So, Jason, you want to tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what you do as an instructional coach and sort of how this has led you to going down the rabbit hole around AI?
All right. Sounds great. I became a teacher and did my student teaching in 2004 after a career switch. And I landed in a high school where I did my student teaching in Belleville High School. And I've kind of been in the same district now for 20 years. So I was a high school teacher for, 7 years. And then I was asked to transfer down to a middle school and then got to learn the middle school experience for another 6. And during that time, there was a spare Chromebook cart that was laying around. And I said, can I have those? And they're like, well, what are you going to do with them? And I said, I don't know. Isn't that the joy? Let's just figure it out. There's this extra thing of Chromebooks. So I brought them in and I started using Google Classroom and everyone said, what's that? And started using, doing all this much more computer-based stuff, having the kids do exit tickets and all this other stuff. And then they said, wow, you're doing some pretty innovative stuff. If we created a position like this, would you want to have a district-wide position? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. I would really enjoy that. In the back of my head, I'm also thinking that just being able to grade a little bit less would be wonderful because it's really hard and middle school is its own particular challenge. And so I became a district-wide, and that would have been in 2017. And started slowly raising people's capacity for this kind of work. And then the pandemic hit. And then they said, hey, can you do this for everybody tomorrow? And then me and my peer, there was 2 of us. We trained 400 plus teachers on how to do remote learning in March of 2020. And then that was the next 3 years of madness and sprinting and trying to redesign things while you're running a marathon. And so it's slowed down a little bit post-pandemic, in the sense of like it's no longer so frantic. But now things just keep changing so fast especially in the last year now that we're at Thanksgiving with AI kind of exploding everywhere.
I love that you came into this out of curiosity and just coming upon the cart like that. And I think it's helpful because I think a lot of our listeners may not have that same spirit of openness and curiosity and excitement about AI. I think there's a lot of fears out there. So I don't know, can you, as someone who's excited about these types of topics, can you help allay some of the fears of our listeners?
Wait, before you answer that, Jason, what did you teach? I'm always curious to know.
I was social studies in high school, and then I was U.S. history specifically for 8th grade. But I also they kind of saw me doing some stuff, and they're like, "We need to get kids more on computers." So I became a computer education teacher, which was get kids used to creating things instead of just consuming.
Very cool. Okay, Jen, sorry. Go ahead. Let's do you remember the question, Jason? Or does Jen need to good, you're better than I am. Go ahead.
So I'm a longtime sci-fi fantasy guy. So I've seen Terminator, I've seen all of the worst, the Will Smith AI movie. I've seen what's in the popular media. I've read Isaac Asimov and Foundation and all this other stuff. So I know what has been postulated out there about how AI could go wrong. I totally do. And so what I also see is that, there are so many guidelines built in. If you're using DALL-E, which is the artificial image generator, the image generator there, You can't put in, there's all these rules of what you can't do. You can't try to do anything about a celebrity. You can't do naughty stuff. You can't do violence. And then you go into ChatGPT, and there's rules upon rules of what it doesn't want you to do. Does it slip up? Absolutely. And so in regards to that kind of thing, I'm not worried, because there's a lot of really good conversations going on. Do I think it's going to displace jobs? Oh my Lord, yes. Sam Altman, who had his own very interesting news, and Sam Altman is the CEO up until yesterday of OpenAI, and he was dismissed by the board yesterday. So that was wild news, which will kind of date this podcast to exactly when we're at. And so a bunch of his lieutenants left with him yesterday as well. So Sam Altman, in a podcast I listened to about 6 months ago, said, we need to start talking about how people are going to get their health insurance and get money when we displace a large number of jobs through this tidal shift. And this is the same kind of tidal shift that happens when we had electricity, when cars came on to the economy. I mean, big changes displace and then create jobs, usually 2 to 3 times more. But there is a displacement period. So I think that's something, and I think it's going to hit the educational field like a tsunami. And that's something that we need to worry about. But I tend to be on the side of, like, maybe this is the final time that to change, because if kids are still doing rote memorization and they're not doing application and critical thinking, and they're not thinking about why they're learning what they're learning, in a world which, generative AI exists, I'm not sure we needed to be doing some of the things we've always been doing. And it might force a change that could be really necessary.
Well, that's fascinating, Jason. And, I kind of start where you left off. I mean, even though in public K-12 education in the United States, we've demonstrated a remarkable ability to resist change, there have been things over time that have moved the field forward quite a bit. So it's interesting. You mentioned a couple of different tools as you were kind of leading off there. You talked about ChatGPT, you mentioned DALL-E. You want to give folks, from your perspective, just sort of a survey of the current landscape of where we are in terms of tools, maybe generally, and then maybe more specifically, tools that seem the most applicable to classrooms and education.
Yeah. So I think there's really 3 piles of tools. The first pile of tools will be just what we call generative AI, right? Large language models, generative AI. So this is a computer program, such as ChatGPT, that has been trained on billions, if not trillions, of pieces of text. And it is really just a predictor. So it's able to predict with amazing regularity what it thinks you're trying to ask. So it doesn't necessarily know things, but it's predicting what it thinks the answer is. So that is ChatGPT, but it's also Claude from Anthropic. It's also Bard, and that's from Google. And then there's a new one coming from Google called Gemini that we've been told. And so that's one pile of things.
And when it comes to generative AI, it's interesting. I heard somebody say one time, those generative AI large language models, they know more than any one of us, but there are things that every one of us can do and know that the AI doesn't. And I'm sure we'll get to talking about limitations in a second, but keep going. So you got and DALL-E is DALL-E, not like the painter Salvador, but
correct.
Yeah. Right. So keep going. So we got large language models, and then
the second pile are related to the first pile. So the second pile are all these tools that have licensed the use of ChatGPT 4 in order to, I call them Legos. You basically take ChatGPT and then you stick a Lego on the outside of it, and then you offer some new service. So there is a wonderful service that I think is going to explode across schools if you haven't already heard it, called Diffit, DIFFIT, and it's a differentiation tool. That is if you've ever had any English language learners in your classroom, you're going to literally gasp and go, oh my gosh. It also allows you to plug in just about anything and say, okay, take that, but make it 2nd grade reading level. Take that, but make it 2nd grade reading level in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Chinese. And so that's the first time I saw it, it blew my mind. And now when I show it to teachers, they gasp. There's also another tool called magicschools.ai. And that one can help you write behavior intervention plans, IEPs, rubrics. and about 60 different other tools. And when I show that, usually a lot of principals will go, wow, because it really offloads that mental labor. And I'll talk about that a bunch later. So that's kind of a second pool, and I could go on with those tools for probably another 20 minutes. And then the third pile are artificial intelligence image generators. And this is where a lot of the pushback has come from the creative communities, because it is scraped digital art in the billions, and then now it can replicate them. So if you were a cartoonist, you can say, in this person's style, create me something. And that's really problematic. I'm a super geek, so I run Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and I use the AI image generator all the time to help supplement and, do great things inside my campaigns. So that is DALL-E. That's also Midjourney is another one. Stable Diffusion is another, and there's a big pile of those.
Very cool. Okay, before we continue, so many things are coming. I'm interrupting, Jen. I'm sorry. So many things are coming up right in my head. So Star Trek or Star Wars?
I was a Star Wars kid, grew up in Star Wars. I appreciate both of them because, Star Wars is basically just fantasy. It's the old school Joseph Campbell hero goes on a journey stuff, whereas Star Trek is what if happens. It's more I would say it's more highbrow, and it's also it's a lot of just ideas of really how might we explore an idea that exists in human culture in a way that would get people to think. So
I so want to nerd out about Lower Decks right now that I can't even, but we're not gonna, that's not why we're here. So yeah, and it's interesting too, because the content creators, those who create language, right, in the written word, their stuff is being scraped just as much as the people who create visual art. But yeah, it's interesting because we really haven't seen the case law or the court cases and stuff around IP and copyright infringement that I think is coming. But yeah, that's super, super interesting. All right. So now that we kind of have a sense of what's out there, and I'm always surprised too, when I give presentations about AI and I ask people to raise their hands at the beginning if they've messed around with ChatGPT, and I'm expecting every single hand to go up in the room. And sometimes it's like 20%, which that blows my mind that there are so many people out there who have no idea that these tools even exist and have never tried them.
Well, especially because they sound like so much fun, right? When you say DALL-E is an image generator, I can imagine second graders, going online, going to DALL-E and say, create me a new pet that's a hybrid between, a hamster and a dwarf that's color blue, but with green polka dot. Like, I could see them just having a blast with it.
Yeah. And that's where, to go back to the legal stuff, is that in order to get an account, you have to have a phone number. You have to be 18. Just today, I saw an article that Google is now lowering its age to use Bard down to 13 to kind of get that 13 to 18 crowd. But it's right now you got to be an adult, or you have to have an adult sitting with you, or you have to be able to lie, like some of us did to get into places we weren't supposed to. So.
Well, and that's interesting too when you think about it. And I think that brings up an equity issue too, because when schools and systems go to ban these tools and not allow kids to use them in school, then the kids who go home and who have parents with broadband internet access and a willingness to pay $20 for the ChatGPT Plus, they have access to something that their peers then don't. So I think that's something we have to kind of keep in mind. So, all right, so talked about the different tools. You want to go a little bit into maybe how you've seen teachers start to integrate these tools. We'll spend a little bit of time on that. And then we really want to focus in on how this next generation of tools can support the business productivity processes of our school administrators, who are our main audience here. So if you want to start with teachers, and then we'll kind of transition over to administrators.
Yeah, sounds great. I think that the first use that virtually everybody does is silliness. They get into a technology and they say, make me a poem that talks about, Mike Doty, the administrator, and Mike Doty, the singer, and compare the two of them and do it as a rhyming limerick. And then you spit out this thing. And it's really funny. And you go, cool. And so then you play with it a little bit more. You might say, how might I teach something? And then you get distracted. And then you go do some grading, and that's the cycle I've seen. And so most people that I work with stopped there because there's too many things on a plate of a teacher. There's too many things on a plate of an administrator. And so what I do once I get them back, I said, okay, try it, but say now, help me create a hook for a lesson on teaching parabolas. And they're like, well, there aren't any. I'm like, well, I guarantee. And then it'll boom, they'll give you 10 ideas. And you say, okay, help me develop numbers 2 and 4 in that list. And then it gives you ideas and you go, oh, wow, that would have taken me an hour and it took me 2 minutes. And so that's where the efficacy really starts in this process.
Exactly. Like,
say, okay,
you're right, because you start playing around with these models and it feels like magic until you really get in there and you start to see the limitations, but then you can work around the limitations by refining the prompts. And I think that's the kind of thing where, like you said, the people who try once and walk away, no, it takes like effort. I mean, they're paying people in Silicon Valley $500,000 a year to be prompt engineers, right? Like, and that's the skill that we're basically trying to get people to intuit as they start to use these models.
And it seems like, just like with other skills in teaching, the more you do it, the more you get used to it, and then it's easier. So like maybe you were so used to not even thinking of having a prompt for something like introducing parabolas, so you don't even ask yourself that question. And now for whatever you consider to be the driest topics or the ones that the kids have the most trouble with, now you think about asking hooks, and this is how you refine it. And so it becomes part of your repertoire of how to make your class more engaging or more accessible.
Well, it's like having a partner with your planning. Microsoft is calling their AI that they're integrating into the Office products Copilot, right? For a reason. I mean, that's what this is. I've heard one computer scientist from Amazon that we spoke to over the summer. I talked with a group of superintendents, and she said, think of these models as somewhere between the best office assistant ever and the Terminator, but more on the office assistant side, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, we interrupted you, Jason. Keep going. Can you tell we like to talk about this stuff?
Oh, yeah. And the thing to build on to what both of you said is that it's not judging you. You don't have to feel vulnerable, because even the best office assistant in the world, at some point, you're like, do I really want to ask this question to that person? Because we know that people have those judgments. We don't necessarily want to be embarrassed. And it's fascinating when you remove that vulnerability. My wife's a therapist and she deals with Brene Brown, right? It really kind of focuses on that idea of vulnerability. So when you remove the need to be vulnerable, right? And no one's judging you and no one's going to see your chat history other than you and of course the servers, right? You can ask questions and you can learn about stuff if you have that built-in curiosity, right? If you are saying, how might I be able to do this? What might be another way to teach? And I think that's where teachers really get into that iterations, is that they can start throwing ideas into this to say, what are the other ways that I've never considered? Because we get stuck in a rut and we think the way we think. And there's efficiency in that because we learn processes, but there's also, it kind of stifles creativity on some level. So that's another big piece.
Right. And I think of the things that as a teacher, that were the drudgery of planning, coming up with examples of things, coming up with analogies and metaphors for concepts, coming up with, interim assessment questions, things like that just required time and effort. But at the same time, we know with these models that they're not perfect, right? And you might get garbage out of it, which I think is more, I don't know, evidence or affirmation that the humans are still central to this process, that there's no chance on God's green earth that we are replacing teachers, because somebody has to know something in order to judge the veracity and efficacy of whatever comes out of these models.
Yeah, but to push back on, go ahead, Jed. No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so the other thing to push back on is, I don't know how things are out in New York State with you, but we do not have people going into teaching in Michigan. What used to be our main our factory, to use the Michigan model, right? Our factory of teachers was Eastern Michigan University, Central Michigan University, and Western Michigan. They just pumped out teachers. And I talk to people there now, and I'm hearing the number 80% decline. I'm hearing 90% decline. And so as we have this massive bubble in our seniority list that is going to pop in 5 years, especially in math, science, and special ed, we've had an opening in our math for our high school, and we're offering competitive wages for a year now, and we haven't got an applicant. And that's the canary. So you say that this is not going to replace teaching. I think that you're going to see HMH and Pearson and all these other people are going to be offering AI models to do that middle 80% of kids very, very soon.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, it would be like having, a student having their own personalized tutor who knows absolutely everything or has access to everything. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. And to be clear, it's the same in New York. We can't find teachers either because we've spent the last 15 years telling kids not to go into the profession and they listened. And so now we're struggling. Although I will say I'm contributing one. My daughter is in school to be a teacher. So
Awesome.
I feel a little bit better. But I'm replacing
no, go ahead.
I'm replacing myself in the system. So
teach math.
All right.
Yeah, no, so yeah, and that hints at, obviously schools can use this for tutoring for, a kid who hasn't yet mastered whatever it is, quadratic equations, create me a set of practice questions for this kid, lots of those kinds of things. But I also want to say one more thing, which is, I think a lot of teachers are limited by how they were taught. And that's how we're stuck in this rut. Like you said, Jason, maybe this is finally the thing to get us out of that. So, I wonder about just really using it to help us, let's say I'm a high school English teacher and the only way I've ever assessed understanding of Julius Caesar is through the essay, right? But what about just opening it up and saying, what other ways might I assess my students' understanding of Julius Caesar, right? And just trying to get out of the way we were taught and open this up a little bit more.
Yeah, in regards to the essay, I had a teacher push back on me really hard because we are piloting it with one teacher that the kids really don't know about it yet, and they're not going to find out through this podcast, I don't imagine, is that we are like BARD is open Google Workspace district. And so kids are able to use it in order to get immediate feedback on their essays in this one kid's classroom, a teacher's classroom. And so I wonder about the efficacy or even the existence of the essay in a year when the essay, why do we teach essays? What do they teach kids to do? How might we get them to that same point without this thing that is not really useful in the real world? And I get how it might have once been, but teachers can't grade them very fast. They're incredibly burdensome. And now all of a sudden kids can make them without any real effort. And they're not great, but they're not also bad either, so if they're just going to cheat, how might you redesign the lesson so that you get them to the same point in a totally new way? I don't know. It's gonna push people.
I think it is, and I think that's okay. I mean, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
No, I was going to say, for people who are still using essays, and you hinted at, this part of what's difficult about being a teacher is the balance. Your day does not end at 3. You said yourself, Jason, right? You go home with a lot of grading. Is there one suggestion you can give for how AI might help with the drudgery of teaching?
I think that, provided everything's coming in digitally, you can take a chunk, drop it into ChatGPT, say, what are some suggestions you might offer for feedback? You can then use that as a way to very quickly, right, give targeted feedback on structure, or on maybe description or something like that. So I think you could easily do that. But then, it comes into when are we cheating? We've had this discussion in regards to calculators. When is calculators cheating in math class? Exactly how much do you have to memorize versus how much you can offer when you have a card with formulas? Is that cheating? And I go, I don't know. I think it's got to be personal. We want fluency, but at the same time, we are creating boundaries, especially for kids of color in our schools towards graduation, right? That why do we insert more obstacles when does it matter? And so I don't know. I know that every time I do anything, I have all my references in front of me, right? I don't need to memorize, but I sometimes have all that memorized things in my head. I still remember my multiplication tables that where I was forced to recite in front of the classroom because that was old school way. So I don't know.
Well, you remember it. No, we're not going to go there. Just kidding. Yeah. All right. So now let's transition a little bit here and let's talk about how these tools can be useful for school administrators. And I'll lead off because I started using ChatGPT, about a year ago when it first came out, and we had Kevin Roos as a keynote speaker at one of our events, and he's fantastic. And I had him in, it was December of last year. You would have thought I was omniscient, that I was having him tell people about ChatGPT a year ago. So I've been using it, and again, like for I would call them rote or mundane writing tasks. Like I used it to like when I was writing my end of year evaluations for the folks who report directly to me, obviously without their names, or I said, write me the summary comments for an administrative assistant who is exceptional in the following areas. And then I copied our evaluation form content and pasted it in, and then it generated a bunch of summary comments that I could then go back and look at and say, yeah, this is good, this is garbage, this doesn't apply, or I need to personalize it here and make it sound like me versus like something that came out of ChatGPT. Even though after Nikki read it, she was like, did you use ChatGPT for this? I'm like, well, part of it, but ChatGPT didn't put in the Schitt's Creek references. That was all me. So what else have you found administrators?
Can I add something to that, Mike? Something interesting about that, because you brought up equity before. When we write evaluations of teachers, our biases come into play, right? So if you are feeding in bullets, like if two teachers both are struggling with whatever classroom management, it's the same bullet. ChatGPT will help to make these evaluations or pieces of feedback more consistent and less subjective too. So I think that moves us in the direction of something that's more fair.
I think, when I think of how administrators use it, the first place I go to is I hear, when I bump into a principal, I'm like, how you doing today? Because I often I have the capacity to be a sounding board for a lot of my admins, and I'll hear the frustration and the anger of some parent interactions. And I think that your ability to take an email from a parent, to dump it in and say, please write me a calm, measured response to this. And you can see through your kind of Hulk blood rage, if you're having that at the moment, that you go, okay, that is a way I could respond. And what I constantly tell people to do, don't use any of it. Don't copy it, but read it and go, that's a sentence I could use. That's a tack I could use to just to kind of bring the temperature down on this, right? And I think that using it as a first blush and say, boom, got it, and then you write it with your own voice, or you take it and then you modify it, like you mentioned. That's part one. Part two, I'd say letters of recommendation. I think that you can tell a person, send me an email with all your brag points, and then you dump it in, you spit it out. I mean, because I used to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours on these letters of rec. If I could bang one out in 20 minutes, that would save so much time, right? Evaluations, like you mentioned. But the one that was probably the most impactful for administrators came out of a superintendent. I presented to this group called Thoughtful Leaders, which is a group out of the MEMSPA group in Michigan. It's middle and elementary principals, which is where I met Jen. And so I presented last year to them, and she said that she used it for worst case scenario templates. She went through all the worst case scenario templates scenarios that might happen in her district, and she created a template using ChatGPT, knowing that if any of them actually happened, that she would be really, really stressed and pressed for time and not thinking clearly. And so now in every case, she's like, it was really hard to do, but I was able to have that messaging in place that I could quickly get it out to the community and get ahead of fears and accusations and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I never would have thought of that. And what a wonderful use of that technology.
Absolutely. And it does. It fits right into what we were talking about removing sort of the drudgery piece or the rote piece. And it makes total sense. I'm waiting for the one. Have you heard of anybody who's working up a soup to nuts system on teacher evaluation? Because I can imagine, or teacher observation, if you had a video recording of a teacher's lesson and could feed it in, and then the AI could at least pay attention to the audio and let you know about teacher talk and student talk and depth of questions and, coherence of the lesson, tone, like you name it. I would imagine that the LLMs could be trained to do all of that.
Mm-hmm. I have not heard about anything like that, but I guarantee someone's going to hear this and go, man, that's my next 6 months. So
well, that's what we're doing. So nobody can do that. That's ours. We got this. Okay. That's going to be the Jason, Jen, and Mike show. All right. So what else in terms of how you would counsel administrators, to reap the benefits of this productivity?
And I'm not sure this is exactly the case, but I mean, just something I played around with this week. So a week ago, OpenAI they had a Dev Day conference, and they debuted this idea of customizable GPTs, right? And so you can take Chat GPT Plus and then upload PDFs to it, and then you can have people talk to it. And so I said, okay, well, immediately I think of all these brand new teachers that we've got, because in our middle school, we've got 7 new teachers that are all fresh from student teaching. And so we've got these people, and like they probably have a lot of questions, but they're incredibly intimidated to email, right, anyone at HR. So they just don't ask them. And so they get all their answers from the staff room or from a mentor or through the stuff like that. So I uploaded all the contracts, all the handbooks, all the guideline emails, right? And I uploaded them all as what they call their knowledge base inside of this. And I made the Van Buren Public Schools TigerBot, right? We are the Tigers. And so now I started asking it questions like, Connie's worked here for 22 years. When can she retire? Like, how do I file FMLA paperwork? And it just spits out an answer, right? And that alone was just magical as a way to, once again, offload mental labor, make people not feel vulnerable and shamed, right? And get people into getting their questions so they can spend their time on the stuff that actually matters, right?
And Jason, I think that is so important, because there's a piece related to generational differences that people really haven't been talking about, because like we have a couple of millennials or even Gen Zers working in the organization, and if given the option, they would prefer not to interact with other humans, right? To the point where they're happy to use a bot and get an answer, or, an online chat or with somebody, whatever. But I wonder if it's like our generation that sort of is like, well, no, I want to talk to a person. And that I'm worried that that's going to get in the way of some of the innovation, because the leaders in the organizations look like us and are probably like, wow, we don't need a bot. That's what people are for. Whereas no, it's an adjunct to the people. It's supporting the people. It's taking away the monotony so the people can use their cognitive energy to focus on things that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that anytime, especially things that are just the same question over and over, the same iterations, that we can remove that noise, we can remove those places in which your energy gets drained by answering the same thing. Anytime we can take those repetitive tasks and somehow automate them, we clear up space to do the real work. Because, I think what is the stuff that's most meaningful? It's the conversations with kids, right? But if I am irritated because I graded for 6 hours last night, I go into school, now I'm less patient with kids. So anytime we can increase that capacity through using some sort of something, we're now giving something back to the kids, and that's where it matters, right?
But it's because not just the treasury. It's also, I think what Mike's getting at is also some in the younger generation prefer not to interact with people.
Yeah.
In many ways. So what I'm wondering is, taking this idea that Mike's going to, make his $1 million about, observing teachers and giving feedback. I'm going to take it a step further and say, why don't we get rid of the principal? Why not have videos that videotape them, and then give them feedback, on things that are objective, right? So out of your 45-minute class, Jen, you spoke for 37 minutes, right? Out of the 45-minute class, Jen, you only asked one question, or some kind of feedback where I'm a new teacher, right? So rather than having some scary principal come in and tell me these things, because sometimes we're just literally counting, right? We're counting how many times did you call on boys or girls? How many, right? So, could you imagine something like what I'm suggesting, Jason?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I don't know the program that's going to do it yet, but I think that once you get past the vulnerability of being on camera, because anytime I've gone in and recorded anybody, it just cranks that tension up. And so if you could get used to having yourself and hearing yourself on camera, because boy, that takes a while to get used to, right? Then if you can get to that point, you can say, wow, and you have the capacity to be reflective. Because like talking to some of our teachers, they're like, I've done everything I've got, or there's no more energy left at the end of the week. The only thing I got time for is a beer and then to go to bed, right? And so how do we kind of fill that up a little bit? Yeah. Because you have to want to be reflective or have the energy to be reflective to even approach that.
And I think there's a couple things inherent in that, in thinking about developing a system that could give people feedback on what many people consider as an art, right? I mean, certainly there's a science to teaching, but you said it, Jen. the 45-minute lesson, you talked for 37 minutes, or you only called on boys, or you like, so you'd have to, there's obviously judgment inherent in these models because humans are creating the models and deciding what data it gets trained on. So I think, that's a piece of it. But I love that idea of, if there was, if at the end of a lesson or at the end of a day, I could get a couple of bullet points about, of even if it's just the data, with no judgment. It's, you talk this much, kids talk this much. You ask these were here's the list of questions you asked throughout the day, categorized according to Webb's depth of knowledge, right? So there could be, that, but you're right. I think, it would take some work to create something that
It's
people
not
would
just
feel
taking
comfortable
out
with.
the lack of comfort with new teachers or veteran teachers at a principal, but it's also quantity, right? There's one principal in a building, 20, 40, 60 teachers, right? So, if I really want to develop my practice, I've just started teaching, those new teachers you're talking about, Jason, fresh out of student teaching. Imagine a report like Mike said, where, every day you got some feedback, every lesson, teachers would develop much more quickly.
We could, right? You could say, maybe here's the entry point. Because I'm thinking about implementation all the time. Like, if, okay, our contract requires that you have one unannounced and one announced observation. So here's what we'll do. If you're a tenured teacher, if you're willing, you can, instead of having an announced observation or whatever, you can do the video recording, put it through AI, get the feedback, and then come in and talk to me about the feedback you got and how you used it. Was it good? Was the feedback helpful? And that kind, that might even get us to, kind of get people into this idea of, wow, I can do this whenever I want. And I don't, there's no other human in the room, Hawthorne affecting this. So, I think it would be interesting to see if anybody goes there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it'd be really fertile ground, to have teachers doing that reflective piece, because I know that when I went down to middle school and I had to completely change my practice, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was trained in high school to teach the material, and the material was king, right? And then I came down to middle school and realized they don't care, right? If it's not feeling connected in the emotionalness of it, if they didn't feel safe. So I started having to really think, well, how do these kids need to learn? And then once I did that, I'm like, okay, how can I teach them how to use reading strategies inside the pool of social studies? And then I realized I wasn't even a social studies teacher anymore. I was a reading and writing teacher. It just so happened we were playing around in that pool of social studies. And that completely changed but I was reflective of that in that process. And then you kind of open it to the opportunities of how might we be better doing this.
So to bring us back from creating what other new ideas we have, I'm wondering if there are some suggestions. I know, because I create a lot of professional development ideas when I write book summaries for leaders. Could AI be used if a leader said, I want to work with my staff, I want to develop some professional learning on anything from as simple as wait time to increasing student engagement? Is that something, could you use AI to develop a professional learning?
I totally think you could. I know that with me, I've been just free talking to ChatGPT while I drive, right? You can just because it's now got this new function where you can just hit a button and talk to it, right? And so in the app on my phone, you just hit the headphones in the bottom right and you can talk to it. So you start talking to it and say, okay, now that we've talked for 20 minutes, summarize the main bullet points of what we just riffed on. Right. And then it all provides text. You take that text, drop it into a Google Doc, and then you can say, okay, this is what I'm going to try to focus on. Right. And then I think the most powerful stuff is after you've got those bullet points, you go over to a different service called gamma.ai, right? And say, make me a presentation out of these bullet points. And then it forms the whole presentation. Right. Or you could take that and go over to CurioPod, which is a different service. These are all the Lego companies on top of ChatGPT, and say, okay, help me design a lesson, some exit tickets, some this and that. And I think that once you have that conversation, it can be summarized and thrown anywhere.
Well, this is unbelievable. I feel like we could go on forever, and maybe there is a part 2 in the future. And Jason, you're welcome, but we won't force you. But totally appreciate your time. It's just wild how big and far-reaching this is. And I would, like you said at the beginning, Jason, I'd put this innovation up against, when we think of the technology innovations that have happened in our sentient time on this planet, probably mobile. Well, first internet, mobile, social, and now AI, probably.
Yeah.
So, Jace, I'll tell you what, this is, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I've been having so much fun with this conversation, but Jason Strzalkowski, we appreciate your time. Appreciate that you're in the trenches doing the work with teachers. Any parting words, Jen or Jason, before we wrap up?
I know that with myself that this has just been year one of this. I really look forward to seeing where years 2 and 3 and 4 go, because I think we're going to be on a pretty wild ride. But I look forward to being on that surfboard as we're in the water together. So
yeah, it's been great to talk with you. And if you want us to do a part 2, we didn't hit cheating, we didn't hit AI school policies or district policies, let us know and we'll consider doing some more. But so many great ideas. Thank you for your time on a Saturday morning, Jason.
All right. It was fun, and I look forward to talking to y'all again. Thanks much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.